Africa's tech ecosystem is growing fast, attracting more attention and investment than ever before. One of the newest and most active players in this space is the Gulf. From infrastructure to digital startups, Gulf nations are ramping up strategic investments across the continent. But what does this mean for Africa's startups? How are these investments reshaping both regions, and what opportunities lie ahead for collaboration, innovation, and inclusive growth? Joining me to unpack these questions is Samuel Ubido, Chairman of Tech Innovate Group. Samuel, in some of our previous conversations, we've talked about a couple of things, like the fintech space and financial inclusion. We've also spoken about Nigeria's cybersecurity landscape. But this conversation is about tech investments and collaborations happening between Africa and the Middle East. There's been a noticeable shift from Gulf nations, especially members of the GCC, towards deeper investment in Africa. What would you say is driving this new wave of interest, especially in sectors like tech and infrastructure?
Sure. I think from my point of view, I can break it into two elements. First of all, will be the economic diversification. First of all, it's a primary move. We see most of the Gulf states looking to move away from oil and gas. We're looking into tourism, looking into tech investment and real estate. So such diversification for economic diversification, they're looking at Africa, most especially fintech sector and tech sector to play into. And then secondly, you're talking about geopolitical strategy and security concerns. So I guess Africa is relatively known to be a safe state. So if you look at the Senegal, the Tanzania, the Ghana, stable economy, stable state, and that's sort of an interest for the Gulf state as well.
This shift seems a bit strategic, right? It appears Africa clearly has something that these Gulf countries want. With the youthful population, there's the rising internet penetration, and even you can say tech innovation as well. What makes the continent such an attractive destination for those investors right now?
I think for me, if you look at Africa, we can break it into four high-level elements. So in addition to the tech ecosystem, Africa is rich in natural resource from a vast natural resource point of view, which could be a reason for an interest. If you look at recently, the UAE-based company is investing heavily into the Uganda oil and gas space. Also, you look at an Emirati firm looking at the Zambian space as well. If you look at the demographic and market growth, Africa has the youngest population, and over the next coming years, we're going to be developing a lot of tech talents. So, from a population point of view, we have young, intelligent, and sharp population for us to use, and then we can see the tech leapfrogging. So, look around the AI ecosystem and AI advancement. So, definitely, there is sort of now an opportunity for us South Africans to catch up from that tech ecosystem point of view as well. So, that's also be the key point that I've got in mind.
Now, let's talk startups specifically for a moment. What kinds of African tech solutions or business models are catching the attention of these investors? Are there specific African tech sectors or innovations that they are gravitating towards right now?
Yes. In terms of startup, the first on the agenda would be fintech and mobile money. So if you look at the Middle East, for example, they have conferences like GITEX, which is Gulf Information Technology Conference. One is happening in Nigeria, which is to sort of brought from the UAE down to Nigeria. And you've got the Money 2020 Middle East, which is a fintech-based event. And what we've seen here is they are focusing a lot on African panels, African strategy, and vice versa. So fintech comes quite first because we have a population and a huge diaspora population. And in that movement of money from either Europe, Middle East to Africa, the companies that are providing the solutions are definitely making money and making profitable. Secondly, you'll be around clean energy and climate tech. As we know, we're talking about net zero, we're talking about green energy, we're talking about energy transition. So what we can see here is a lot of energy startups and companies in Africa are starting to see funds from companies over in the Middle East. And the Middle East is quite strategic because they've got experience in running large energy firms for a very long period of time. So some of that expertise is being transferred onto the local ecosystem. And another huge area would be the logistics and e-commerce space. So the logistics that you're talking around moving of goods, moving of services, and you're talking about e-commerce website and e-commerce platforms. And then I guess to summarize, we have the big elephant in the room, right? Agri-tech and food solutions. of course, before we talk about technology, we have to eat, right? So solutions that either allows farmers to do lending, allows farmers to sell product, scalable farming, technologies around how do we create more food security and more agri-tech solutions is quite a bit of interest to UAE-based investors as well.
Now, if all goes well, this will be a mutually beneficial relationship, right? What does that say about where both regions are headed?
For me, the future looks bright. So we can see the trajectory of investment across both ecosystems. Recently, I was reading the UAE government has invested up to $1 billion into the Ghana market from a tech investment park to encourage the ecosystem. Also, the brands of Giantex Africa coming to Nigeria. We can see that inflow of, technology, ecosystem building coming through. And also from a, Saudi ecosystem point of view, well, we can see, and recently I was reading around Kuwait investing heavily into the Nigerian ecosystem. What I see is there is now a strategic opportunity in terms of the Gulf states invest in Africa, and also some of the best practices which we've learned from Africa going also into the Middle East. So I think that the future is bright because we both have complementary natural resources, we have complementary talent, and almost similar cultures. So definitely that trade between both ecosystems is only going to get better and only going to provide an alternative route and path for investment. That would be my thoughts.
Talking about GITEX coming to Nigeria, Samuel, there's also a cultural and social angle to it, right? Because the way we do things here in Nigeria is quite different from over there. But then how can both countries work together to build more inclusive startup ecosystems?
Sure. This is quite a very good example of how this works. So if you look at the partnership in the route into market, so about 3-4 weeks ago, we had the first national cybersecurity conference, which was in partnership with a UAE-based company, and that brought together the right ecosystems for that. Then GITEX Nigeria, that's now partnering with the Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy through NITDA as the implementing agency. And I think what we've seen here is in the Middle East, they've obviously mastered the act of doing large-scale conferences quite well and also made it quite profitable. So I was reading a report from the last year's GITEX, the economic output over in the millions, which is, of course, bringing in more tourism, more investment, more partnership, and also an increased trust. I think similar playbook in the Nigerian ecosystem is only going to support the ecosystem because what we're going to do is we're going to bring in international companies. We're going to be showcasing Nigerian and African-based startups. We're going to bring in the right government partners, and globally is going to bring in trust because they're going to say, well, there are a lot of fantastic companies in Nigeria and also fantastic companies looking to go into Africa and Nigeria to do business. These initiatives is taking best practices for what has been honed over in the Middle East and then implementing something similar in Nigeria, localizing it, and then taking it from there. And recently, we've just collaborated with the Pressify, so the Presidential Committee for Financial Inclusion and Economic Matters, will be leading a delegation of respectable fintechs, bank, and government stakeholders over to Saudi in September. Aim there is pretty clear. So we're going to look at the Saudi ecosystem from an investment, fintech, financial point of view, and see what lessons can be learned and what partnership we can bring in from both corridors. Because ultimately, trade is when two ecosystems connect, and then there's exchange of value across both parties. So for me, I'm very optimistic. I think Africa and Nigeria, we're ready. We're opening our borders, our partnership, and looking for strategic partners to take us to that next step.
Well, baby steps, right? But how can both parties ensure that this growing partnership is not, just profitable, but, to ensure that it is sustainable, it is impactful, and of course, mutually beneficial for the people on the ground?
Sure. I think that's a very fantastic question because whenever we embark on any initiative, we think about the sustainability. And that is very important because one man can have a vision, but if the people don't buy along with that vision, post the man, that vision, I guess they do say it sort of goes away. So from my point of view, I think there's 3 elements to this. The first element is the government-to-government element, whereby we have Ministry of Trade and Investment and the African and Nigerian side, and also Ministry of Trade and Investment over in the GCC regions. What MOUs are we signing, and how close are the trade investor desks communicating? Because that's the first high-level policy and collaboration road in terms of, okay, well, a large company wants to come into Nigeria, or a large company from Nigeria wants to go to GCC. Of course, they'll first approach the Ministry of Trade and Investment. Now, within those ministries, do they have dedicated desks, dedicated skilled workers, and MOUs signed to foster that collaboration? That's number one. Number two, we don't have what you call chambers of commerce. So you have likes of examples from different continents, which have quite big chambers of commerce. And do we have a Nigerian GCC or an African GCC chambers of commerce? If so, how active is it? How do people get memberships? And how can we start leading more delegation and then more trade missions? And then the last part will be, I'll call it private sector based ambassadorial roles, meaning people that have done businesses in both ecosystems, speaking about the benefits and the amazing things which they've achieved. Because in the world we live in, information is power. So if there are fantastic deals and partnerships happening and we're not aware of it, therefore people wouldn't have the right confidence and the right trust. So as a private sector point of view, whatever I'm doing in the Middle East, either the UAE, either Kuwait, either Saudi, the Bahrain, what channels are available to ensure that this good news is spread. So I'd say those sort of three elements encompasses would then sort of create a way whereby government collaborating with private sector with a few ambassadors to ensure that, one, we are seeing the exchange of value, and then that leads to a sustainable path to keeping this going over and over again.
Well, it's always a pleasure having you on the program, Samuel Obido, Chairman of Tech Innovate Group. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Olayemi, for the invitation. I'm always keen to share my thoughts on trade, investment, and ecosystem building. Bye for now.